it. Yeah, all right, let's get started. We're talking about content and form. Remember, content is the materials, the form is the making, such as a chair utilizing wood and nails. That's content, the actual material, and the form is the actual structure. So, form refers to the relatively stable set of relationships which exist over time. Content represents the internal composition of those relationships. A form is a relatively stable set of relationships. Having a stable form allows a subject to develop over time through contradictions with other subjects. As the social form of the material production process, relations of production have an inherent degree of relative stability, which means relations of production can develop over time. In general, the development of relations of production is driven by development of the productive forces. Throughout most of the duration of any given era of class society, the productive forces will steadily develop, and this will drive the development of relations of production. Eventually, however, the productive forces will develop beyond suitability with the relations of production, which leads to a crisis. This crisis gives way to newly formed relations of production, as Marx explained in Contributions to the Critique of the Political Economy. As society's productive forces will clash with the relations of production. When this happens, the old social structure, which once helped society develop, now hold it back. This conflict leads to a period of social revolution, and the resulting changes in the economic base eventually transforms all of society. Whenever new relations of production are established, there is a period of transition as the old relation of production is disrupted and negated. This is a period of instability for human productivity processes as the whole and new ruling classes battle for supremacy. Gradually, oh my gosh, 10-minute restriction already? What? Oh my god. Fucking weird. Jesus Christ. Whenever new relations of production... Wait, hold on. What was I... This conflict leads to a period of social relations, and the resulting changes in the economic base eventually transforms all of society. Whenever new relations of production are established, there is a period of transition as the old relations of production are disrupted and negated. This is a period of instability for human productivity processes as an old and new ruling class battle for supremacy. Gradually, as the new relations of production become firmly established, productive forces begin to stabilize and resume steady development. Marx defines the development of productive forces in Capital Volume 1. By increase in the productiveness of labor, we mean generally the alteration in the labor process of such a kind as to shorten the labor time socially necessary for the production of a commodity, and to endow a given quantity of labor with the power of proceeding a greater quantity of use value or more goods. In simple terms, socially necessary labor time is the amount of labor and time needed to produce something within the material conditions of the certain human society, and the amount of labor time necessary to make something change over time. The socially necessary labor time needed to produce a hammer in the agrarian pre-industrial society was quite different from that which is needed to produce a hammer in the modern society. This is because the standards and techniques of production have become far more advanced. Here we go. We got a picture. We are on page 89 now. About to show a picture. Look, 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 TikTok. Look, it's me. I'm a real person. I'm a real person. Anyways. Oh yeah. So cycles of development of the mode of production. How's everybody looking at this picture? Any lag? Any lag? No lag. Good, good, good. Okay. So, number one, suitability. Development. Looks like we got some people here with some land and a windmill, right? And then it has over here, I'm thinking that these are the material. We're going to find out. State of development. Stable stages of development. So here we have relations. Let me get this up. Relations of production and productive forces suit one another and mutually develop one another. Development is stable and consistent. Unstable. Number two. Development. Don't know what this is. Looks like factories. Mode of production. Looks like it's the stuff that we get from there. So we're going to figure out what those are. Productive forces develop so much that they are no longer stable in relations of production. Relations of productions now hinder development of the productive forces. Unsuitability. Right? Number three. I have no idea. Unsuitability. Don't know what this is yet. To suitability. Okay? Objectives need for development leads to new relations of production that are suitable with productive forces. Okay? Now we have suitable. Don't know what this is yet. Then right here it has suitable stage of development. And up here was unsuitable stages of development. So we're going to find out more. All right? So here it says cycles begin again. Relations of production and productive forces are once again suitable with one another. Development is once again stable and consistent. So we're going to find out what this means more, okay? No lag, thank God. Thank God. All right, the material productive process has followed a pattern of development for as long as there has been class society. When productive forces are compatible with the relations of production, development is stable and constant. Whenever productive forces grow to become unsuitable with the relations of production, instability leads to an objective need for new relations of production. Whenever productive forces develop so much that they have become unsuitable with relations of production, this unsuitability will cause social disruption and eventually social revolution. This stems from the what Marx identified as the objective need for the relations of production to be suitable with the development level of productive forces. The productive forces will always eventually develop to such a point that new relations of production will need to arise which are more suitable. This in turn will allow the productive forces to be fully utilized by human society. Until this need is met, human society will struggle with stagnation and chaos, which human societies will objectively need to solve before stable process of development can be resumed. At the end of the feudal era, the ruling class of feudal lords restrained the productive forces. Early capitalists were much better suited to the newly emerging industrial processes. which were developing. This made capitalists wealthy and powerful and much better suited to take control of the means of production. However, feudal lords tried to resist this change and maintain their grip on power over society. In the end, however, the feudal lords could only slow down the development of new relations of production. Ultimately, the capitalist class successful waged social revolution, which made capitalists the ruling class over a newly developed proletarian working class. Even in the time of Karl Marx, the productive forces of human society had developed to such an extent that they were no longer compatible with the capitalist relations of production. This is because the operation of productive forces is socialized, while the ownership of the means of production is private. This creates an objective need for a social revolution that will lead to relations of production that are suitable to the socialized productive forces, i.e., socialist relations of production. The more the productive forces develop, the greater this objective need becomes, and the more pressing the need for social revolution by the working class. Capitalists have worked for centuries to prevent the working class from successfully achieving social relations. Thank you, by the way, Chicken Strips, thank you. Achieving social relations. But the objective need persists for workers to raise up and develop relations of production that are more compatible with socialized operations of the means of production. This is the historical mission of the working class and the objective basis of scientific socialism. As a methodology of carrying out this mission, transition periods occur at the threshold between one stage of development of relations of production and the next. This transition period are times of highly instability. Such instability was seen during the transition from feudalism to capitalism. As the bourgeoisie emerged and supplanted the feudal class, there was significant disruption in the lives of workers. Wars and social conflicts combined with social upheaval, leading to significant disruptions in the productive forces. These conditions persisted until the capitalist class was able to stabilize itself as the dominant economic class, at which point productive forces began to develop in terms of efficiency and suitability with the capitalist relations of production. This suitability, however, was short-lived, as mechanized industries enabled productive forces to develop and socialize at a rapid pace. For this reason, productive forces very quickly became unsuitable with the relations of productions under capitalism. As such, the history of capitalist political economy has been fraught with instability. There have been many factors which have led to this inevitable instability. One such factor is the inherent contradiction stemmed from the wage system and capitalism as it pertains to the price of commodities. As productivity increases, the cost of commodities are driven lower. Wages are also driven lower, leading to an inherent increase in instability over time. As Marx explains in Capital, hence there is an imminent in capital an inclination and consistent tendencies to heighten the productiveness of labor in order to cheapen commodities, and by such cheapening to cheapen the laborer himself. This is only one of many internal contradictions of capitalism, caused by the insuitability between the productive forces and the relations of production, which leads to instability. Marx, Engels, and other socialists throughout the past 2 centuries have identified many other such contradictions and sources of instability, which drive an objective need for social revolution and new relations of production. Understanding such contradictions and developments of the material production process within human society is what we call the science of political economy. As the productive forces continue to develop to higher and higher levels under capitalism, it is inevitable that capitalist relations of production will become increasingly unstable and will eventually give rise to new relations of production. It is the duty of the communists to apply scientific socialism as a political program in order to help bring about the end of capitalism and transition towards the stateless, classless society of communism as efficiently and smoothly as possible. When analyzing the motion of the dialectical contradictions between the productive forces and relations of production, Marx pointed out that at a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production, with the property relations within the framework of which they have operated hitherto. From forms of development to the productive forces, these relations turn into their fetters. Then begins an era of social relations. I'm reading it now. That just barely came out. So, yeah. The part 3, I think it's scientific socialism or political economy. I can't remember. The quote above comes from the preface to the contribution of the Critique of a Political Economy, in which Marx explains how the dialectical relationship between productive forces and the relations of production drives and develops of human society. We shall now examine the full passage from which the above quotation was drawn. In social production of their existence, man inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. Here, Marx is explaining that humans have the objective need to create social economic forms, otherwise known as human societies, by working together to produce the material needs of life. The social relations which humans form to do this work are what we called relations of production. Marx describes these relations as independent of the will of human beings because humans do not have a choice when it comes to establishing these relationships. Rather, these relationships are more or less forced upon human beings because they are a prerequisite for humans to survive, just as the activities which humans undertake to produce food, clothing, and shelter are not taken as a choice. Entering into relations of production is equally necessary for humans to survive and for human society to continue existing. Furthermore, humans do not get to decide exactly what sort of relations of production they will enter into. Instead, the relations of production arise from objective material conditions. Of these conditions, the most important factor is the current development level of the productive forces. Marx continues. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation of which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corresponds definite forms of social consciousness. Here, Marx explains that the relations of production as the social form of the material production process, which humans must participate in serve as the material base for all other aspects of human society. Here, Marx refers to the material/economic base and superstructures of human society. And again, we're going to look at this picture. This is what they're talking about. Here's the little dividing line. You got the base, means of production, class relations, commodities, nature, and political economy. And you have the superstructure. From this arises the superstructure, the type of government, culture, religion, and media and education. Oh yeah, there we go. We're good. So, The base of society is a material aspect of the social economic form. The superstructure is the aspect of social consciousness. The base of society encompasses those aspects which are related to the material production process. The superstructure of society includes social consciousness forms and institutions which reflect and protect the base. Another one we have up here, essentially rooted in consciousness, the superstructure. The base, essentially rooted in material relations, determines, essentially rooted in consciousness, the superstructure. The superstructure impacts the base. It's all in a circle. It's more of a spiral, by the way, everybody. The rise and falls of things. The base as a material, I already read that part. All of the social consciousness forms and institutions which define the superstructure include the legal system of human society, the state, religion, institutions, art, etc., are determined by the relations of production, which serve as a material base of that society. The superstructure can never determine the material base of society, but can only impact upon the base. This reflects the dialectical materialist conception of the relations between the material and consciousness. As an example, we can look at the way religious institutions exist under feudalism versus how they manifest under capitalism. Under feudalism, the relations of production determine how religious institutions exist. For example, churches owned by lands and held serfs who worked those lands to provide for the material existence of the church in a manner which reflected and was suitable with the feudal relations of production. Another important source. I don't know why it wants me to feudal. Another. Oh wait, where was I? Where was that, everybody? Material okay, hold on. I'm gonna reread this. Sorry. I'm gonna read this. Sorry, guys. As an example, we can look at the way religious institutions existed under feudalism versus how they manifest under capitalism. Under feudalism, the relations of production determined how religious institutions existed. For example, churches owned land and held serfs who worked those lands to provide for the material existence of the church in a manner which reflected and was suitable with the feudal relations of production. Another important source of revenue was donations and patronage from wealthy feudal lords. Feudal relations of production determine the very manner in which Christian churches exist in feudal Europe. The church could impact back on the base in various ways, such as collecting tithes from noble lords, which impacted the material wealth, power, and status in society. But the church's very existence, the way in which it continued to exist in feudal society was determined by feudal relations of production. By contrast, today, religious institutions exist in very different conditions because the material base of capitalism is quite different from the material base of feudalism. Today, churches primarily continue their existence by collecting donations from workers who earn wages and from wealthy members of the bourgeoisie who profit primarily from the labor of workers. This determines the manner in which religious institutions are able to exist under capitalism. Under capitalism, as in under feudalism, churches, as superstructural institutions, can only impact back upon the economic base in various ways, such as influencing wealthy capitalists as well as workers. Examining why any superstructural element, institutions, or phenomenons will demonstrate that this same relationship is true in all aspects of human society. The material base determines the way in which superstructural elements exist. While those superstructural elements can impact upon the material base, as Marx continues, the mode of production of material life condition, the general process of social, political, and intellectual life, It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is critical for understanding the relationship which defines and propels human society forward. Human beings do not consciously decide their social existence nor the objective laws which govern the world. Under feudalism, neither peasant nor feudal lord, nor even the most powerful king, willfully and consciously determine the relations of production. Rather, these relations of production came about through material processes and development which, as Marx defined above, were separate from human consciousness and will. Conversely, human consciousness is heavily conditioned and determined by the material base of society, i.e. the relations of mode of production. Subjective human will does have a role to play in the history-making project. However, for instance, social revolution brought about through the development of class consciousness is a prerequisite for the advancement of humanity from one stage of development to the mode of production to the next. I'm a LARP. Yep, I'm a LARP. You're correct. I'm LARPing. How did you guess? Thank you. Human philosophy, which develops in any given era of class society, is heavily conditioned and determined by the material base of that society. That is why Marx and Engels wrote that any investigation into human philosophy must take into consideration the material base, the relations of the mode of production of society in which they arose. And here we go. We have a picture. I'm okay with being a LARPer. It's not a big deal. Who gives a fuck? Human society. Base. Superstructure. Here we go. Relations to production. Productive forces determine, I think that's how it goes, the relations to production impacts the productive forces. Determines, I'm guessing that's a superstructure thing, which the superstructure, which impacts the base. So this is the base, this is superstructure. Inside the base, they have the impacts. What's inside those, they have more impacts, right? There you go. Hope people are getting it. Human society is defined by the relationship between the base and superstructure. The base is largely defined by the material production process, which describes a dialectical relationship between the productive forces and the relations of production. In Anti-During, Engels explains the critical importance of development of productive forces in the historical advancement of human society. The materialist conception of history starts from the principle that production, i.e. productive forces, and with it the exchange of products of production, i.e. relations of production, is the basis of every social order, i.e. superstructural institutions. That in every society that has appeared in history, the distribution of wealth and with it the division of society into classes or estates is determined by what is produced, material needs. How is it produced? Productive forces. And how the products are exchanged, relations of production. From this point of view, the final causes of all social changes and political revolution are to be sought not in the brains of men, not in men's better insight into eternal truths and justice, but in changes in the modes of production and exchange. How's everybody doing? Am I doing good? Am I lagging or is it smooth? Smooth or good? Still good, no lag. All right, cool. Understand that relationships between the material base and the superstructure is key to understanding social formation theory, which is the core of historical materialism. According to this theory, productive forces develop until they are no longer suitable for existing relations of production. This eventually leads to the fundamental change in the relations of production and the development of new social economic formation with new relations of production and a new mode of production. And this, in turn, leads to changes in the superstructure of society. This pattern of development of human society reflects the law of suitability between the relations of production and the productive forces, as well as the law of the base determining the superstructure of society. Social formation theory is discussed more in chapter 4. As an example, productive forces develop under feudalism under the course of many centuries. For most of this time, productive forces are suitable to prevailing feudal relations of production. Eventually, however, new production technology and many other developments relate to productive forces led to the situation in which productive forces were no longer compatible with the feudal relations of production. This led to a social revolution in which the capitalist class, a newly emerged class which dominate the newly predominant productive forces which had developed under and within feudalism, took primus, and the older ruling class of feudal lords and monarchs lost their position as ruling class, eventually dwindling away into irrelevancy. Meanwhile, the oppressed class of the peasant transitioned into a new proletariat or working class, and the wage system of capitalism developed as a new mode of production. Based on this newly developed productive forces and their corresponding suitability relations of production, this change in the material base of society, the transition from feudal material base to capitalist material base, led to a massive change to the superstructure of society, so that nearly all structure elements of society today are much different from how they manifest under feudalism. The church, political system, the arts, the prevailing human philosophies have all changed drastically because they are now determined by the capitalist mode of production instead of feudalism. This is how historical materialism explains the advance of human societies over time. Developments in productive forces lead to shift in relations of production. The change of relations of production leads to development of new forms of class society, which leads to changes in the superstructures of human society. Here we go. We're going to do another picture. So here we have superstructure, base, right? Here, the base, productive forces, which is us, relations to the production, superstructure. Okay? And then 2, base. Oh my gosh, it's the same thing over and over again. Okay? Always affects. See how it affects? Superstructure. The base always always raises the superstructure, and the superstructure impacts the base. So we'll find out what this picture means. Oh my gosh, I've been 10 minutes again. What the fuck? Stop. You fucking, if people are fucking like reporting that you're cowards. You're goddamn cowards. Jesus Christ. Showing myself. Over time, productive forces develop continuously until they are no longer suitable with relations of production. Eventually, the relations of production must develop into a new form which is suitable with the productive forces. These changes in the base of society will in turn lead to deep changes to the superstructures of societies. Here we go. In the preface to the contribution of the critique of the political economy, Marx and Engels outlines the objective and objective basis for the study of human history. In studying such transformation, it is always necessary to distinguish between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural sciences, and the legal, political, religious, artistic, and philosophic, in short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. This Sorry. Hey, Kurt. This is groundbreaking. Understanding of human history, which is the material basis of historical materialism, transforms the study of history into a scientific field by recognizing the progression of human society through various stages of class society as material processes which have objective and even predictable aspects. Marx goes on to describe how previous generations and historians fail to put the study of history on a scientific basis due to the eras of idealism. Just as one does not judge an individual by what he thinks about himself, so one cannot judge such a period of transformation by its consciousness, but on the contrary, this consciousness must be explained from the contradictions of material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production. Previous generations of historians who believed that history it was primarily a study of human consciousness fundamentally understood the nature of the forces which shape the advanced human society. But putting emphasis and primus on the ideas and philosophies of the ruling class, previous historians could have no hope of understanding the history of human development on a scientific basis. Only by studying the underlying material basis of society and its development through the development of productive forces can we see history as a phenomenon which has objective and predictable properties. In other words, the application of the principles of objective laws of dialectical materialism, which is understood, which with its understandings of the relationship between the material and the consciousness, is what makes historical materialism a scientific understanding of history. Historical materialism helps us to understand that there are underlying material forces, i.e., the development of forces of production, and by extension, relations of production, which lead to the superstructural elements of human society, as Marx and Engels go on to explain. So, social order is never destroyed before all the productive forces for which it is sufficient have been developed. A new superior relations of production never replace older ones before the material conditions for their existence have matured within the framework of the old society. In other words, development in human society does not result from development of human consciousness. Superstructure institutions and ideologies such as philosophy, art, and religion do not determine the progress of human society from one mode of production to the next. They can impact back on the material base of society. In particular, class consciousness, social revolution are the important factors in the advancement of class society. In the end, the determining factor of human development is the material base. Human society will never advance from one mode of production to the next until the material conditions have been established. These material conditions are always rooted in the development of the productive forces and resulting changes in the relations of production. So long as the productive forces remain suitable and harmonious with the prevailing relations of production, the existing mode of production will continue to dominate human society. However, as soon as the productive forces are no longer capable with their predominant relations of production, new relations will begin to develop, which will lead to an advancement of a new mode of production. Relations to production and mode of production are very intertwined with each other. They're very, very that. No development in human consciousness alone could ever have led to the transition from feudalism to capitalism. No great thinker, philosopher, artist, nor religious figure could have fundamentally shifted the mode of production from feudal relations of production to capitalist relations of production. Only changes up to the material base, i.e., developments in productive forces, could lead from one mode of production to the next. Understanding the dynamics between productive forces and the mode of production, as well as the dialectical relationship between the material base of society and the superstructure of society, is what allows historical materialism to place the study of human history on the objective scientific basis. Engels describes the objective basis of the development of human society in socialism, utopian and scientific. Conflict between productive forces and the mode of production is not a conflict engendered in the minds of man, like that between original sin and divine justice. It exists, in fact, objectively, outside us, independently of the will and action, even of the men that have brought it on. It is thanks to social revolution that the old relations of production of society have been replaced by new relations of production, which are more suitable to the development needs and the developed productive forces. Social revolution thus give way to new forms of relations of production, which in turn allows the development of productive forces to continue. In the framework of historical materialism, the term social revolution is specifically defined as a social process which cumulates its relations of production undergoing an essential change such that a new mode of production develops. Social relations are always preceded by the development of productive forces to such a high degree that they are no longer suitable with establishing relations of production. The newly established relations of production, which result from a social revolution, must invariably be more suitable to the development needs of a newly developed productive forces. Development needs are the prerequisite condition which are necessary for stabilized productive forces and establish a new mode of production which can properly accommodate productive forces in a newly developed higher form. Social revolution is a broad phenomenon in human society which takes place across the span of global human society. Though some regions and nations may lag behind and participate more slowly than others in these processes. For example, feudalism did not transition to capitalism all at once. Instead, the transition was gradual and took place more quickly in some locations than others. In some nations, like England and the USA, capitalism was established relatively early, and the capitalist mode of production set in quickly. Whereas in other nations, like Russia and Vietnam, feudal relations of production persisted for much longer. However, once a new mode of production develops, it will eventually transform all of human society. This is partly because the new society's productive forces will exist at such a higher state that the older mode of production cannot hope to compete. Social revolution involves human consciousness and will, as human beings, must participate in social activity to bring about revolutionary change in society. However, this conscious activity is determined by the material conditions brought about by the development of productive forces and can never precede those material conditions. And we have another picture. Another visual one? What the fuck is this? TikTok, you allow other people to do this. You allow multiple people to do this. You allow lots of people to do this, TikTok. You just don't like me. Okay, so right here. Quantity range A, 1, 2. Quality shift. So that's A to B. 3, 4. Period of motion, C. We're going to have to find out what this means. Hopefully. Jesus. Bro, they let other people not fucking show their fucking faces. The fuck? This diagram shows the anatomy of dialectical development. Over time, changes into quantity leads to shifts in quality. This process was explained in detail in part 1. Note that the new relations of production initially arise within the older pre-existing mode of production. Capitalist relations of production first emerge with the feudal mode of production. and for some time, capitalist relations of production existed simultaneously with feudal relations of production until the quality shift occurred in the form of social revolution, which allowed the capitalist class to take power as the new ruling class, after which the feudal classes gradually transitioned out of power over human society. This is in accordance with the objective laws and the properties of development as described within the framework of materialist dialectics. Productive forces and new relations of production develop gradually over time through a series of quantity shifts until there is a quality shift, i.e. social revolution, which gives way to the newer, higher mode of production. The productive forces will continue to develop after the social relation takes place. The new mode of production is established. Indeed, since the new mode of production will be more suitable with the more developed productive forces, development can occur more rapidly as soon as the older, obsolete mode of production has given way to the new mode of production. In scientific, utopian, and in socialism, utopian and scientific, Engels describes how this process of social revolution took place within the feudal mode of production to give way to the capitalist mode of production. Engels explains that capitalist relations of production initially arose within the feudal mode of production, and in the development of the production's forces under this newly developed relations of production soon overpowered feudal relations of production. This led to social revolution, which gave the capitalist class primacy over old feudal powers. And once the capitalist class became the ruling class, the productive forces could develop more freely and efficiently, since they were no longer restrained and hindered by the absolute feudal mode of production. Here's Engels. The mode of production peculiar to the bourgeoisie, known since Marx as the capitalist mode of production, was incapable with the feudal system with the privileges of conferring upon individuals entire social ranks in local corporations, as well as with the hereditary ties of subordination which constituted the framework of its social organization. The bourgeoisie broke up the feudal system and built upon its ruin the capitalist order of society, the kingdom of free competition, of personal liberties, and of the equality before the law of all commodity owners, of all the rest of the capitalist blessings. Thenceforth, the capitalist mode of production could develop in freedom. The relationship between productive forces and the relations of production constitutes the dialectical contradictions which pose material and technological content against socio-economic forms of production processes. The universal category pair of content and form is described in, the productive forces are considered to be the content, the material base of human society, while the relations of productions are the stable social economic form which the content of productive forces takes. Together, this content and form compose the mode of production which exists as a material base of human society in any given period of class society. This may at first be confusing. However, things become more clear when we remember that within dialectical materialist framework that all things, phenomenons, and ideas are defined by internal and external relationships with one another. These relationships are dialectical in nature, meaning that these relationships lead to change and development within and or between the related subjects. Thus, we can define all of the concepts mentioned above in terms of materialist dialectics. The social economic form of humanity simply refers to society, that is to say, all the relationships which human beings have with one another, relating to the economic base and the social superstructure of society within a given period of history. The social economic form can be expressed primarily as a dialectical relationship between the material base and the superstructure. In this relationship, the material base determines the superstructure, while the superstructure can impact the material base. This is in line with dialectical materialism understanding and the relationship between the material and human consciousness. The material base of human society is a given historical period, consists of dialectical relationships between the productive forces, the content of material bases, and the relations of production. The forms of material base and the relationship the content determines the way in which the material base of human society exists. The form can impact back upon the content. Let's examine the structures of both feudalism and capitalism with these materialist dialectical definitions in mind. All right, here we go. Here we go, everybody, with my restrictions upon restrictions. So we got feudalism, social structure of feudalism, superstructure. We have down here relations, ruling class feudal lords, working class peasants, other classes, clergy, crafts guilds, merchants, etc. Relations of production. Down here, agrarian production, productive forces is the base. So this is the base, and it impacts, and it creates this, and that impacts that. All right, let's go here. Social structure of capitalism. They made it a little bit different. Superstructure. So you have the ruling class, bourgeoisie, the working class, the proletariat, other classes, remnants, petty bourgeoisie, lumpen proletariat, relations of production, industrial productive forces, base. This, of course, creates this, and this impacts that. All right. I know they want my face, but I don't get it. TikTok, you let other people not show their face. Just want to make that clear, TikTok. Feudal society has complex social relations with various classes competing for benefits from the means of production. Capitalism has a simpler class structure with the vast majority of humans regulated to the proletarian working class. Content and form of feudal society. Feudalism is a social economic form of human society which consists of feudal productive forces as content and feudal relations of production as form. Specifically, the feudal productive forces include agriculture resources, and technologies included farmland, crops, farm animals, and simple agricultural equipment like plows, hand tools, and so on. Feudal productive forces also include human labor and the labor of beasts of burden. Together, these productive forces are the content of the material base of feudal society. Feudal relations of production are the social forms of the material production process of the material base of feudal society. These relations include several classes, including ruling class, which includes nobles, monarchs, religious clergies, as well as various laboring classes, which predominantly include peasants, as well as other laboring classes, such as craft guildsmen, merchants, and so on. The relations of production consist of the relationship between all these classes, as well as the relationship between those classes and their productive forces, such as farmland, tools, etc. Feudal relations of production are thus complex configuration in which nobles own farmlands, peasants, workers work the farmlands, and other classes related to the productive forces in which each other is in various ways. The relationship between the content productive forces and the form relations of production of the feudal society is dialectical. This means that the productive forces and the relations of production leads to changes and development in one another, and by exchanges, by extensions change the development in the whole of the material base of feudal society. Changes in the material basis also lead to changes in the superstructure of society. Eventually, feudal productive forces developed to such a degree that they were no longer compatible with feudal relations of production. Elements of the merchant and noble classes developed factories and machinery which enabled productive forces to develop to such a high degree that they were no longer compatible with the feudal relations of production. This eventually led to social revolution, a qualitative shift, which gave the newly formed bourgeoisie class rulership over society. This was the dawn of the capitalist mode of production. Content and form of capitalist societies. Capitalism is a social economic form of human society which consists of capitalism, productive forces, as content, and capitalist relations of production as form. Specifically, capitalist productive forces include industrialized resources and technologies, including factories and socialized production processes and technologies that include complex machinery, computers, and information systems. The various other highly developed production technology, together with natural resources, which are predominantly owned by the capitalist class. Together, these productive forces compose the content of the material base of capitalist society. Capitalist class structures, relations of production are much more simple in feudal class structure, relations of production. These are two essential classes under capitalism. The ruling capitalist class, which owns nearly all the means of production, such as factories, equipment, and technologies, as well as the proletariat, also known as the working class, which operates the means of production. The content, productive forces, and the form, relations of production of capitalism have existed in dialectical unity with one another. This relationship defines the development of material base of society, which in turn drives the development of the superstructure. This is the basis of the social formation theory, which is discussed more in annotation 98. The productive forces of capitalist societies have already developed to such a high degree that they are no longer suitable with the capitalist relations of production. This will inevitably lead to the social revolution, which will allow the proletariat to become the ruling class, which the proletariat includes the vast majority of human beings on earth. This will bring about the end of class society and will usher a new era of stateless, classless society called communism. The motion of this contradiction between productive forces and relations of production is a process that passes back and forth between suitability and opposition in accordance with the law of suitability, which is the manifestation of the universal law of unification and contradictions between opposites. The contradiction between productive forces and relations of production also follows the law of transformation between quantity and quality, as well as the law of negation of negation. In materials dialectics, motion simply refers to the change of development, and all motion change developments arise from relationships between things, phenomena, and ideas. The three universal law of materialist dialectics. Here we go. TikTok. You allow other people not to say. I'm gonna keep saying this, everybody. You allow other people not to show their face. I am no different. The three universal laws of materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics contains three universal laws, which describe the development of all things, phenomena, and ideas. These laws are, quote, 1. The law of transformation between quantity and quality. 2. The law of unification and contradictions between opposites. 3. The law of the negation of negation. These laws are further defined in, part 1. The law of suitability between the relationships of production and the productive forces is manifestation of these laws in human society. Law of suitability between relations of production and productive forces. The law of suitability between relations of productions and productive forces, also known as the law of suitability, states that the development level of productive forces must suit the development levels of the relations of production. Whenever productive forces develop to such a degree that they are no longer suitable with the relations of production. This creates a subjective need for the relations of production to change. Until relations of production develop to a more suitable form, the material production process will be inefficient and many problems will arise. Engels describes how the law of suitability leads to the rise of capitalist productive forces within feudal society in socialism, utopian, and scientific. Before capitalist production, i.e. the Middle Ages, the system of petty industries obtained generally based upon private property of the laborers in their means of production. In the country, the agriculture of small peasants, freemen, and serfs. In the towns, the handicraft organized in guilds, the instruments of labor, land, agriculture implements, and workshops. The tools were the instruments of labor of single individuals, adapted for the use of one worker. And therefore, the necessity, small, dwarvish, circumscribed, but for this very reason, they belong as a rule to the producer himself. To concentrate these scattered, limited means of production, to enlarge them, to turn them into the powerful levers of production of the present day. This is precisely the historic roles of capitalist production and of its upholders, the bourgeoisie. In the fourth section of Capital, Marx has explained in detail how since the 15th century this has been historically worked out through the three phases of simple cooperation, manufacture, modern industry. But the bourgeoisie, as it's shown there, could not transform these puny means of production into mighty productive forces without transforming them at the same time from the means of production of an individual into social means of production only workable by a collectivity of men. The spinning wheel, the hand loom, the blacksmith hammer are replaced by spinning machine, the power loom, the steam hammer, the individual workshops by the factory, applying the cooperations of hundreds and thousands of workers. And in like manner, production itself changed from the series of individuals into series of social acts, and the production from individuals to social products. Productive forces were developed to such a high degree that they became hopelessly unsuitable to the feudal relations of production. This led to an objective need of social revolution, so the relations of production could give way. Introduction of the capitalist mode of production. The law of commodity production, hitherto latent, came into action more openly with greater force. The old bonds were loosened and the old exclusive limits broken through. The producers were more and more turned into independent, isolated producers of commodities. It was the increasing organization of production upon a social basis in every individual productive establishment. But by this, the old... Again? Bro! Stop! Oh my gosh, it was in... Okay, hold on. Producers of commodities. It was increasing organization of production upon the social basis in every individual productive establishment. By this, the old peaceful, stable condition of things was ended. Wherever this organization of production was introduced into a branch of industry, it brooked on other methods of production by its side. The field of labor became a battleground. The great geographical discoveries and the colonization followed them multiplied markets and quickened the transformation of handicrafts into manufacture. The war did not simply break out between the individual producers and the particular localities. The local struggles begot, in their turn, national conflicts, the commercial wars of the 17th and 18th centuries. Okay, well, maybe not to you, buddy, but you don't have to be here. Once capitalist relations of production and capitalist productive forces overtook the material base of human society, older feudal relations of production simply could not keep up. Thus, the less suitable form of feudal society weakened and eventually collapsed, leading to our current era of capitalism. This historical example illustrates the law of suitability in action. Once productive forces became so developed that they were no longer suitable with feudal relations of production, it necessitated the development of relations of production which were suitable with the newly developed productive forces which were labeled capitalist. This led to social revolution, which led to a new mode of production in which these capitalist productive forces and capitalist relations of production were suitable with one another in accordance with the law of suitability. Great! You don't have to be here, do ya? You can move along, scroll by then. If it's not good for you, scroll by. The law of suitability manifested the law of unification and contradictions between opposites of the materials dialectics, according to V.I. Lenin. Summary of dialectics. The universal law of unification and contradiction between opposite states that the fundamental, originating, and universal driving force of all motion and development processes is the inherent of objective contradictions which exist in all things, phenomena, and ideas. Now you can, okay, go on. Whenever the two subjects exist, wait. Yeah, according to okay, hold on. The fundamental originating in the, wait, did I read this? Okay, I'm gonna have to reread something. According to V.I. Lenin, summary of dialectics of the universal law of unification and contradiction between opposite states that the fundamental, originating, and universal driving force of all motion and development processes is the inherent and the objective contradiction which exists in all things, phenomena, and idea. Whenever two subjects exist in a dialectical relationship with one another, they are said to be in unity because they define one another, and they are said to be in contradiction because they develop one another. The suitability, the law of suitability between relations of production and productive forces merely describe how the law of unification and contradiction applies to the content, the productive forces, and the social form, relations of production, of the material base of human society. Especially the dialectical relationship between productive forces and the relations of production drives the development of the material production process, which is defined by this relationship. The law of suitability manifests the law of transformation between quantity and quality of materialist dialectics. The law of transformation between quantity and quality is defined by Frederick Engels in Dialectics of Nature. For each individual case, qualitative changes can only occur by a quantitative addition or subtraction of matter or motion. When productive forces and relations of production are suitable with one another, it allows for the efficient development of the relations of production to occur. Eventually, this development arises to such a quantity of productive forces are no longer compatible with existing relations of production. This is in turn leads to a quality shift as new relations of production arises and replaces or negate the older less suitable relations of production. In this matter, the dialectical relation between productive forces and relations of production adheres to the law of transformation between quantity and quality. The law of suitability manifests the law of negation of materialist dialectics. The law of negation is defined by Engels in Anti-Düring as follows. The true natural, historical, and dialectical negation is formally the moving source of all development, the division into opposites, their struggle and resolution. And what is more, on the basis of experience gained, the original point is achieved again, partly in history, fully in thought, but at a higher stage. Put more simply, this law states that changes and development always takes place, eventually in the form of negation, as one contradicting subject overtakes another. The dialectical relationship between productive forces and relations of production clearly adheres to this universal law, since the quality shift which occurs when one mode of relations overtakes another as an act of negation. For example, capitalism arose to contradict feudalism, and eventually negated feudalism to become the predominant mode of production. Thus, we can see that the law of suitability between relations of production and productive forces are merely a manifestation of the three universal law of materialist dialectics as they pertain to the development of human society. By nature, the contradiction between productive forces and relations to production, which defines the material production process, generally drives development in a gradual and subsequential manner. It is also possible, however, for sudden rapid development to occur, or for sequential steps to be bypassed. Development of productive forces and relations of production tends to be gradual and subsequential, in accordance with the universal law of materialist dialectics. Development is typically gradual in accordance with the law of transformation between quantity and quality. In most instances, productive forces are developed relatively slowly in terms of quantity until the quality shift occurs after some threshold has been surpassed. Development is typically a sequential supply because the conditions to bypass a stage of development are rare, and development of human society tends to follow the development of productive forces, which themselves rely on gradual and sequential development of science, technology, organizational systems, etc. Marx describes this sequential pattern of development in The Contribution of the Critique of Political Economy. No social order is ever destroyed before all the productive forces for which it is sufficient have been developed. The new superior relations of production never replace older ones before the material conditions for their existence have matured within the framework of old society. Mankind thus inevitably sets itself only such tasks as it is able to solve, since closer examination will always show that the problem itself arises only when the material conditions for its solutions are already present, or at least in the course of formation. As an example, it would be absurd to imagine that agrarian medieval Europeans, upon the feudal mode of production, might have developed nuclear power plants. All right, real quick, let's see what we have. We're on 106. Looking for the next. Okay, we're getting close. 106. There we go. 106. This is because, as Marx described, feudal relations of production and productive forces were not nearly sufficient to produce such technology. Human beings living in the feudal era didn't even ponder such matters as nuclear power plants, because the problem of nuclear power production had not even presented themselves yet. In that era, the material conditions for the existence of nuclear power plants had not yet developed, and great many intervening steps and developments, including the development of capitalist relations of production and productive forces, had to occur before human beings could begin grappling with the problems of nuclear power generation. That said, it is impossible that there are historical examples of bypassing stages of development, both in terms of productive forces and relations to production. There were some nations where productive forces rapidly advanced and bypassed stages of development through interactions with foreign culture. Vietnam, for example, went directly from simple agrarian practices of feudal era all the way through the era of French colonization, and then suddenly the rapidly developed industrialized agriculture processes with the assistance of the Soviet Union started from the Revolutionary era in the 1950s, and especially after the end of the Revolutionary War in 1975. This allowed Vietnamese farmers to bypass many stages of technological development of productive forces. In terms of relations of production, Vietnam's society is currently attempting to bypass the capitalist mode of production altogether. That is to say that Vietnamese people and government are attempting to build towards socialism and eventually communism without ever giving the capitalist class control over Vietnamese social economic formations. This attempt at building socialism while bypassing capitalism has gone through several stages already. Here we go. The revolutionary economy, 1945 to 1975, during which wars were fought against fascist Japan, colonial France, and the imperialist United States to free the Vietnamese people from foreign oppression, and the Communist Party of Vietnam was developed into the leading forces of social revolution in Vietnam. The subsidizing economy, 1975 to 1986. This was an attempt to move fully and immediately into a communist relations of production. These efforts ultimately proved to be too aggressive and unrealistic, as productive forces could not be developed rapidly enough for suitable relations of production to development. There's a little critique, I guess. The socialism-oriented market economy era, 1986 present. This is the current era of Vietnamese social relations, during which time market reforms have been implemented in an attempt to develop productive forces without allowing capitalists to take control of the state and economy. The first era of this economy was known as Doi Moi, which in Vietnamese for renovation. The focus and priority of this era has been the transformation of Vietnam into a medium-income nation with well-developed industrial productive forces. The Doi Moi era has just successfully come to an end. Vietnam is now entering into the rising nation era, with the goal of becoming a medium-high income nation by 2030, and high income nation which can implement full socialism in by 2045. These efforts and struggles are described in detail by Vietnamese experts using historical materialist analysis. In the speech called Building of People's Socialism, Ho Chi Minh explained that one of the chief goals of Vietnamese social revolution is to build a socialist people with socialist values and manners. Here's how he said it. We won against colonialism and feudalism. Our main mission now is to win against backwardness and poverty, to build socialism, and to make our people live in happiness. That mission is great, but also very difficult. But in our party and our entire people are determined we will definitely achieve it. In order to build socialism, first and foremost, we need to have socialist people. In the current era, the people, government, and Communist Party of Vietnam have the ambition to build socialist relations of production over the coming decades while bypassing the domination of Vietnamese society by capitalist society. hastening the development of socialism and bypassing or determination of capitalist class society is the primary task of scientific socialism, which is in part 4 of the volume that this text is taken from, in which we hope to translate in the future. The concept of bypassing stages of development is discussed more in annotation 23. The role of the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production are the basis of the law of suitability between the relations of production and development of productive forces, which states that, quote, the development level of productive forces must suit the development level of the relations of production. This law is the most essential driving force for the movement and development of the mode of production and the material base of human society, and by extension, the development of human society in its entirety. Summary. Chapter 1. Dialectical materialism is we're almost done, everybody. Dialectical materialism is a system of philosophy and methodology which asserts that material determines consciousness, while consciousness can impact back upon the material. Materialist dialectics is the methodology derived from dialectical materialism, which holds that all things, phenomena, and ideas are constantly changing and developing at all times, and that this change and development is driven by relationships. Materialist dialectics also holds that all things, phenomena, and ideas are defined by those same relationships. Human class society in any given stage of development is defined by the dialectical relationship between the material base and the superstructure. This dialectical relationship between the base and the superstructure drives the development of human society. Within this development process, the base determines the superstructure, while the superstructure is able to impact back on the base. This is in accordance with the dialectical materialist understanding of the relationship between the material and the conscious activity. The material base of society is itself defined by dialectical relationship between, I think this is the last page, last page, between productive forces, the content of the material base, and the relations of production, the social form of the material base. In this relationship, the productive forces determine the relationship of production, while the relations of production can only impact back on the productive forces. This is in accordance with the properties of the universal category pair of content and form, defined by the framework of materialist dialectics. The quantity of productive forces develop over time through various innovations in science, technology, organizational systems. Eventually, productive forces will develop to such an extent that they no longer are suitable for relations of production. At this point, the relations of production will have undergone a qualitative shift, which will eventually lead to relations of production, and by extension, the change of the mode of production and the material base of society. This is in accordance with the law of transformation between quantity and quality within the materialist dialectics framework. The shift from one mode of production to the next is carried through social revolution, which is the process by which one or more ruling class emerge to dominate the material base. Once the social revolution is complete, human society will enter a new stage of development, and the cycle will restart in terms of development of the mode of production, which drives the advancement of human society. This process is defined by the law of suitability between relations of production and productive forces, and as also governed by the three universal laws of materialist dialectics. From all of this, we can conclude that the development of all human society is driven by the development of productive forces. Productive forces determine the relations of production, which determine the mode of production, which determines the material base of human society, which determines the superstructure of human society. Understanding that the productive forces are the driving force of development of human society is what allows us to view history as an objective and somewhat predictable process. which puts the study of human history and society on a scientific basis. This scientific analysis of humanity is the basis of social formation theory, which is core to historical materialism. In the next section, we will examine the material base of superstructure in more detail in order to better understand how dialectical relationships between the two drives the development of human society. And that will be chapter 2, dialectics of the base and superstructure. We'll end there, everybody. Sorry for not like stimulating people, I guess. My bad. 109. We ended at 109. My bad, everybody. Let's see here, bookmarks. Does anybody have any questions in the comments? Anybody have any questions in the comments? You can't type. Hey, Gray, how you doing? We're going over historical materialism by Luna Oi. Nope, no questions. Okay. All right. So we know that the superstructure is defined by the base, and they have a dialectical relationship. The base creates the superstructure, rises the superstructure, and the superstructure then impacts. The base is defined by the social relations to production, the productive forces, and the mode of production. Yeah. Yay, Gerald Horn is a goat. Did he help this out? He did, Gerald Horn. Yep, thank you. So yeah, so like now we're gonna get into more on the definition of the base and the superstructure. The definition of the base. So we'll get into more of how it impacts each other and how the base creates the superstructure and how society is culturally engaged. Because that's why I think it's important as a Maoist to understand that the material base does define the superstructure, but at the same time we need a cultural revolution. Destroy the base, form cultural revolutions, create new societies, new infrastructure, redefine what labor is, redefine what the relations are, and we also found out too that the law of suitability, when all those things become unsuitable, then a social revolution happens. In our case, the social revolution shall be socialism, because socialism advances further because you don't need I don't know what it says. It advances further because we're more, and it wastes less because we're more worried about the essential labor time instead of the surplus one. Yeah, they respect L. Well, this is an ML that's not based in revisionism, you know, like, because there are some MLs that agree and they're not based in revisionism, you know what I mean? They're anti-revisionist MLs, you know, but I wish that MLs would advance into a Maoist position, because it is the third stage of Marxism. Whether you want, I don't know, and it's hard because not a lot of people agree with the, and even not that, like Maoism is supposed to be advanced too, because motion and matter together, always in perpetual movement, always quantifying, always has quantity to make a qualitative shift, never ends, you know what I mean? So yeah, but anyways, I am going to, nothing is stagnant, everything's interconnected. I might not be too connected with like a rock, but the rock is connected to something else. Or there might be a chance where, you know what? That might be a cool rock. I have to build something out of it. So I don't know. Anyways, other than that, I'm going to head. Yeah, look at that. Visibility again. TikTok, you allow this content. There you go. I don't care. I'm closing it down anyways. All right, then. I'm going to let everybody go. I hope everybody has a good evening. Thank you, Gray, for coming in and liking the live. I appreciate it.